This is Becoming UnDone.
Coach Tomey, he was, I think his vision for the program that I think the fans really took to was he considered the football program a family. And he treated everyone like family. And, in his coaches shows at the end of the year, he would always have a music video of the team, enjoying themselves, having picnics. He really brought that family atmosphere. And, of course, in Hawaii, family, ohana, is very important. And Coach, he was just really willing to immerse himself into the culture.
Coaching big-time college football in 2025 is not for the faint of heart. Heck, all of college athletics for that matter. But football in particular, you've got huge rosters, millions of dollars of name, image, and likeness or NIL money, and these collectives that seem to have emerged from the drywall overnight that support them. And then there's the transfer portal. Now, don't get me wrong, reform in college sports was long overdue. Back in the days before NIL, I personally saw and worked with college athletes who were so poor they couldn't afford more than one meal a day. All the while, fans paid hundreds or even thousands of dollars for tickets to watch them play, and their $100 jerseys were on sale in the bookstores. Yet, they didn't get a dime. But still, things have gotten crazy and fast. In many ways, it's like all the worst parts of pro sports without the benefit of pro contracts to keep everybody accountable. When sports commentators talk about the Wild West of college sports, I think that's what they're talking about. So when you see coaching legends like Nick Saban and basketball coaches like Jay Wright or Mike Krzyzewski, Tony Bennett step away from the sport, suddenly in some cases, it's tempting to think, well, these guys were older. Maybe they were ready to hang it up and spend some more time at home. Or maybe they were ready to hand the reins of their teams over to some fresh blood. And you'd probably be right, at least sorta. There's also something to just how hard this system has made life on coaches today. You literally have to re-recruit your entire roster every single day. And then there's the scrutiny. Can you imagine what internet message boards and social media would have said back in the day about lightning rods like Bobby Knight or even old school tough guy coaches like Vince Lombardi or Howard Schnellenberger? That list could go on. No doubt, the pay today for coaches is incredible, especially head coaches. But demands have never been greater, and the criticism has never been sharper. Over the years, I've come to realize that the math is impossible in just about every fan base. Our team needs to win. If you tallied all the expectations of every group of alumni, everyone wants their school to win a ton of games, grab a conference championship, minimize their losses. At the Arizonas and the Texas Techs of the world, where I've been for much of my career, anything less than 8 or 9 wins in a season and people start to grumble. Replace that stupid coordinator. Maybe both of them. Maybe the strength coach needs to go, whatever. But a couple of years of those in a row, as in literally like one bad year and a slow start to the next, and it's no confidence for the head coach. Fire him as soon as possible. Bring in a new guy. At other places like the Alabamas, the Texases, the Oklahomas, the USCs of the world, it's that pressure and more. If you aren't clipping off 10 wins or more every year, you are an abject failure as a leader. Just ask Lincoln Riley. And past success doesn't matter much either. You could win a national championship one year and put up a 5-5 record the next, and you'll be on some analyst's hot seat board. Go 6-7 the next, and you're gone. Ask Ed Orgeron. All this to say, I think it's safe to say that in many ways, we've lost our ever-loving minds. The money has become insane. And the math tells us that there's no possible way that every school in the Big 12, for instance, could go undefeated next year. If Arizona beats K-State at home on the first week of the Big 12 matchups on September 4th next season, K-State just took a loss. And that happens every week. If there are winners, there have to be losers. It isn't possible for all of us to win. Although I will say when Texas plays Oklahoma, me personally, I would like it if they would both lose. Just saying. Back on track, though, even today, there's a certain brand of coach who can rack up the wins, raise the trophy, get their name chiseled into the side of the stadium. Some are genuinely good people. Some are awful. But there's also another kind, the kind that leaves a legacy so deep that decades later, players, coaches, staffers alike still talk about the impact they had on their lives, regardless of the records or the championships or the final rankings in the polls. I was fortunate enough to get to be part of a team led by the second kind. Richard Hastings Tomey. If you stuck around this long, I guess it's worth mentioning that my name's Toby Brooks. In addition to being a professor, a speaker, a podcaster, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I spent 3 years at the University of Arizona as a graduate assistant athletic trainer. I didn't know it at the time, but I was part of the staff for Coach Dick Tomey's final season with the Wildcats in 2000. At the time, I was just trying to keep my head above water, try to learn the ropes, do the work, figuring out my place in the world of college sports. Back then, I didn't realize I was witnessing the final chapter of a legendary career. But as the years passed, I began to realize that Coach Tomey wasn't like most other coaches. He didn't just teach football. He taught life. He didn't just build teams. He built men. Coach Dick Tomey might have never won a national championship. He never even won an outright conference championship. He split the 93 Pac-10 title in a three-way tie with fellow 6-2 UCLA and USC. And yet, if you talk to people who played for him, coached alongside him, worked for him, or even just sat in his office for a conversation, they'll tell you, no one shaped them quite like Dick Tomey. Sadly, we lost Coach Tomey to a brief but valiant battle with cancer in 2019. But I've been thinking about that and him a lot lately. As I've grown as a leader and look to leaders in my own past that I'd like to emulate, Coach Tomey keeps coming up to the top of that list. Famously, Coach was frequently quoted as saying, "Football isn't complicated. People are." You know, I think that same thing could be said for just about any line of work. The job isn't complex, but leading people sure is. And I've not seen many do it better than Coach. In a profession that's dominated by the importance of wins and losses, Dick Tomey created a legacy that endures decades after he coached his last game. It's that legacy that I've been thinking about ever since. How did he do it? How did he inspire so many to follow him, to believe in him, and to carry his lessons forward? Not just to their careers, but to their lives. And that's the question at the heart of this series. For the next 10 episodes, we're going to dive deep into one of the most transformational leaders I ever got the honor to serve. We'll hear from people who knew him best, his players, his staff, his family. We'll explore the moments that defined him, the values he instilled in others, and the lasting impact he left on the game and on everyone he led. We'll walk with him through those early years in Indiana, his first head coaching job at Hawaii, his time at Arizona and the legendary Desert Swarm defense, and finally his return to the sidelines and ultimately his retirement at San Jose State. And in the process, I hope you and I will both learn what it takes to lead better. You're listening to Becoming UnDone, and I'd love to welcome you to the life, the lessons, and the legacy of Coach Dick Tomey, a Toby Brooks passion project. Joining me today is author and ESPN Honolulu web editor Lance Tominaga, who had a front row seat to the journey, co-authoring Rise of the Rainbow Warriors, capturing the highs, the struggles, and the relentless pursuit of something greater than wins and losses over the 1977 through 87 seasons at the University of Hawaii. As a longtime sports journalist and storyteller, Lance has spent his career documenting the moments that shaped teams, programs, and lives. Today, we'll dig into the lessons behind the legend, what made Coach Tomey special, what we can still learn from his leadership, and why his influence endures. Because if there's one thing Coach Tomey showed us, it's that true success isn't about the trophies you win. It's about the people you lead, the values you live by, and the legacy you leave behind. But Lance, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So we shared a little bit via email and off camera, off mic before about my background with Coach Tomey, but I'm curious to know how you got involved in the process. The book is fantastic, Rise of the Rainbow Warriors. So tell me about how you originally got involved in the book project and got to work with Coach Tomey.
Mm-hmm. Well, when the word got out that, Coach Tomey wanted to write his memoirs about his time in Hawaii, he got in touch with Watermark Publishing, which is a local publishing company. And I had done work for them for quite a bit with several books. And the publisher, George Engelbretson, he knew I was a big sports fan and a University of Hawaii fan. So he thought I would be a good fit for the project. And the three of us, we got together, we had lunch, and Coach Tomey and I, we hit it off right away. And we agreed that this would be a great project.
Yeah, he certainly had a way with people. And I know just to a person, every person I've talked to about him, he made you feel like you were important, even if it was the first and even last time that he was meeting with you. So there were a lot of things about Coach Tomey that I wasn't familiar with until I got and read the book, and I had some of the facts wrong. So let's start off with Coach Tomey's background. He wasn't a prolific D1 or NFL player. He got into coaching relatively late by today's standards. So as you were researching and working on the book, what to you stood out the most about his upbringing and the coaching tree that helped him be successful later on in his career?
I think it really was the fact that Coach Tomey, he was a very hard worker, very willing to learn. And as he kind of moved up the coaching ranks, he had a lot of respect for the coaches who helped him out. And he took bits and pieces from every coach. And he just soaked up the information. And in the book, we mentioned about his relationship with Bo Schembechler and how he was a huge influence. And so I think Coach Tomey, he was just very much a hard worker and someone who was really eager to learn, about coaching and about not just the X's and O's, but treating people right. I think that was a big part of his success.
Absolutely. I was there for the transition when Coach Tomey was really forced out at Arizona and John Mackovic came in. And I don't think people realized just what a good fit Dick Tomey was for Tucson. And I think the same could be said about Hawaii. And he just had this blue-collar work ethic. He wasn't going to out-recruit you in terms of, a roster full of 5 stars, but he got the most out of every player that came and really was a relationships guy. What would you say stood out the most to you about Coach Tomey's life prior to coming to the island as the head coach for the Rainbow Warriors?
I really think, like you mentioned, he never really was the recruiter, but he really believed in treating his players like young men that they are. And all I know is from talking with Coach Tomey, he just loved the game of football, and he just loved his players from all his coaching stops. And that just translated on the field. And he quickly, when he arrived in Hawaii, he quickly had the respect of his players, which I think was really key to that first season.
Yeah, in the book, it's mentioned how really he got on board late for that 1977 season. It was really kind of thrown together. He inherited a staff. He didn't come in and clean house and fire everybody. He really gave everyone from players to staffers to coaches alike a chance to kind of ride with them during that 77 season. He didn't have any head coaching experience, though, and Hawaii was a job on the upswing in terms of Division I and the new stadium. Obviously, it's easy to look back and see how successful he was in 10 years there, but do you think that he was really ready for that transition originally, or was it something he had to grow into?
I think it was something he had to grow into. I think he came into this Hawaii job knowing the challenges. And to be honest, the program was somewhat of a mess. They were coming off a 3-8 season. The previous head coach, Larry Price, he had resigned, I believe in May. And, he resigned because he felt he didn't have the support of the university and the state. They didn't support football. And there were even rumblings, there were like local players versus mainland players. There was a lot of friction. And Coach Tomey, he came on board. By the time Coach Tomey was hired, the recruiting season was over, and they didn't have the benefit of a spring practice. But Coach was really eager to get underway. He had a vision of what he wanted to do, and I think he just rolled up his sleeves and went to work. And
Yeah.
that's pretty much what he did.
Absolutely. And some of the first order of business was essentially to re-recruit his entire roster that he inherited.
Yeah.
So he mentions about how, in retrospect, he wished he would have had one-on-one meetings and such. What did you take away from your conversations with players about that early transition and how he handled that relative to what that team had been through?
Mm-hmm. I think, like the players I talked to, they felt Coach was really like a breath of fresh air with his honesty. He never promised positions. He never promised starting jobs. He was just very honest with them. And I think they were really impressed with that. And they were willing to, once they bought into him, I think that made a key difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember we had a pretty significant Samoan presence on our team at Arizona. So he had managed to keep those recruiting ties to the island. And Coach Aquina and Coach Babers were kind of cut from that same cloth. But in many ways, he's an outsider. He's this little white guy from Indiana, and he's moving to the island where culturally it is completely different. That said, there were still things about his personality that really meshed well in that culture. So talk to me about how his leadership and his coaching philosophies really were a good match for what existed and what eventually sprouted and grew at UH.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Coach Tomey, he was, I think his vision for the program that I think the fans really took to was he considered the football program a family. And he treated everyone like family. And, in his coaches shows at the end of the year, he would always have a music video of all the team, enjoying themselves, having picnics. And he really brought that family atmosphere. And, of course, in Hawaii, family, ohana, is very important. And Coach, he was just really willing to immerse himself into the culture.
We adopted him! What about ohana?
He hasn't been here that long.
Neither have I. Dad said ohana means family.
Huh?
Ohana means family. Family means
Nobody gets left behind
Or
forgotten. I know. I hate it when you use ohana against me.
To have played for or worked for Coach Dick Tomey was to know the human side of his leadership. He was tough, hard-nosed, workmanlike. He cultivated this idea of a brotherhood and a family. And he built that over the years at Hawaii, Arizona, and San Jose State. Coach Tomey was a salt-of-the-earth, blue-collar type leader who found good people and made them great. Other coaches relied on recruitment of five-star athletes that they could bring to campus and try to keep them excellent. Coach, on the other hand, relied on finding good people, cultivating their character and their qualities, and he sent them away better than they arrived. It wasn't just an act either. He was a humble and unassuming leader at the beginning of the era of tailored suit prima donna coaches. But it made a difference, especially to his players. Consider this quote from NFL linebacker Lance Briggs, as told in a 2019 article by Anthony Gimino, published in SI.com. Quote, Briggs from Sacramento, California, was a big-time recruit who also had home visits from Nebraska, USC, Oregon, and Cal. But none of the coaches had Tomey's approach. Him coming into my living room, and the first thing he talked to me about was my smile. He didn't talk football. For the first 15 to 20 minutes, he just talked about, you have a smile that will light up a room. That smile is going to carry you in life. And it was touching. Nobody else talked about my smile, actually. Maybe I didn't smile for anybody else. End quote. Or consider this quote from 12-year NFL vet Glenn Parker. Quote, I remember then USC coach Larry Smith came into my living room talking to my mom and dad. He had a suit on. Everyone was dressed up, very formal. In comes Johnny Majors of Tennessee, same thing, suit. Dick Tomey comes walking in wearing a windbreaker and shorts, looking like a PE coach. But he knew who he was recruiting. He was recruiting a kid who didn't play high school football. All I had known was shorts, flip-flops, and t-shirts. I'd done nothing but surf and play volleyball my whole life. He knew who he was recruiting. End quote. I saw that same spirit firsthand too. Back in the day, the team held fall training camp at the remote campus of Cochise College in Douglas, Arizona. And I didn't know this at the time, but we were literally just 2 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border as the crow flies. To my knowledge, each year in the Tomey era, in that searing 3-digit southern Arizona heat, toward the end of camp, there was a much-anticipated Swim Olympics that was held with the players competing, having fun, enjoying some sweet relief for a few minutes of enjoyment after a very long bunch of 2 and sometimes even 3 days. Coach had slipped on the pool deck or diving or something. I don't remember the details. But he'd gashed his chin open and he was bleeding all over his new bright white Camp Cochise t-shirt. One of our equipment staff members offered to give Coach a fresh shirt before he went to talk to the Tucson media. But he wouldn't have any of it. He shouted back, "Hell no, this makes me look tougher." When I think back, I realized that was just who he was. It wasn't about money. It wasn't an act. He genuinely wanted to connect with people in his program, and he put on no airs of superiority in doing it. And I can tell you without a doubt, whether it was a specific motivational technique or not, it worked. As a lowly graduate assistant athletic trainer, honestly one of the least important and lowliest people affiliated with the team, I believed in Coach. I wanted to work harder for him, and I wanted to play a role in helping him succeed because I'd watched him do the same for every person in that program.
When he recruited Jesse Sapolu, who went on to be a 4-time Super Bowl champion with the 49ers, Coach went into the Sapolu home, and instead of sitting down and talking like just a normal, he actually sit down on the floor, which was like the custom at the time. And he really impressed the family, and Coach was very humble. Like I said, he just immersed himself. He fell in love with Hawaii very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's evidenced by the fact that once he kind of got out of coaching, he returned, and he wanted to revisit that experience with his book. And so I think there's plenty of evidence that on the surface, it wouldn't look like a great match, but certainly much about that work ethic and getting the most out of people. And really, and I've heard him say it wasn't about the X's and O's, it was about the Jimmies and the Joes and the relationships that he built. And in talking to players that I know of and staffers that worked with him, the lessons and the legacy really, no one ever talks about football. We had some great seasons at Arizona, and certainly Hawaii did as well. But that's not what people recall about him. In a lot of discussions with former players, coaches, and staffers, what would you say were the lasting lessons that they recalled about their time with Coach?
Oh, gosh, there were so many. But first of all, when Coach was with Arizona, weren't they the number 1 team in the preseason at one time? The Desert Swarm?
Yeah, that defense was renowned.
Yeah. And I know, Coach, he always preached defense first. But yeah, the players, I'm not sure about what lessons they learned, but I do know that they just appreciated his honesty and the fact that, years later, 20, 30 years down the line, Coach would still maintain relationships with them, keep in contact with them. And he really brought a sense of family. And I think that was really important to the players. They thought of him that he could be very tough. Just like Coach Bo, Coach Tomey could be very tough, but he was also very fair and very compassionate. And I think that really helped the culture of the program.
Yeah, it's almost a buzzword today for people to talk about culture and, like you said, Ohana and family. But he was doing that 50 years ago. And it wasn't a program. It was just who he was. And it just kind of bubbled out. And so in the book, you described the time surrounding his departure from UH and how he actually approached the athletic director after he had announced his resignation and that he was going to Arizona. And he actually wanted to undo the deal. And he asked the question, are we too far down the road? Yeah. What would you say prompted that? And how did that transition weigh on him at the time? He wasn't this guy that was just looking for the next big job or big paycheck. It really bothered him to leave UH in that moment.
Yeah, and I didn't know this before I interviewed him for the book, but he was really torn about this decision to leave Hawaii. And it was a great opportunity for him, but he really, truly loved Hawaii. And I guess at one point he changed his mind and he thought, I want to stay. So he talked to the athletic director. I think there's Stan Sheriff at the time. And Stan, of course, he said, we are too late. It's too late in the game. And I think Stan Sheriff, he knew it was best for the university and best for Coach Tomey too, to take this opportunity. And I think everything just worked out very well.
Yeah. In the moments of those transitions, it's human nature to feel hurt, or even though it is in everybody's best interest, there's just no way to shake the fact that someone's going to feel slighted or jaded or like they're walking out. In the years that have passed since then, though, there's been great heights that UH has seen on the football field, and there have been some pretty dark seasons as well.
Yeah, sure.
How would you say his legacy would be described today with the benefit of decades to look back on that 10 years there? What do people say about that era of Hawaii football?
Well, I think people, the longtime fans, they look at Coach Tomey's tenure at UH as really the start of Hawaii becoming a big-time program. Coach never went to a bowl game. I think his best season was 9-2, but he also had a lot of 6-5 seasons, 5-6 seasons. But he really started the excitement of UH football. During his time at UH, their home games averaged like 43,000 fans, and even though the program since Coach Tomey had great success, they never really recaptured that magic that Coach had, because it was something new, it was something exciting, and I don't think you can ever really replace it. They used to call the games, Hawaii games, they called it Saturday Night Fever, because the fans would pack the stadium. There were 50,000 fans when Hawaii hosted USC. It was just rocking, and there was just a level of excitement that hasn't been recaptured since, even during the June Jones era, I think.
Yeah. My first experience with Arizona football, I came to campus in 98. I wasn't assigned to football, so I didn't make the trip to UH. But that was the season opener, and it was on the road, Aloha Stadium. So me and my new coworkers, one of us did get to make the trip, and so we were kind of watching for him. But it was 98, on the road, Aloha Stadium. I had seen that in bowl games and the Pro Bowl and all those things. And I remember the U of A staff wore Hawaiian shirts, and I didn't know Coach Tomey's history at that time. And it was a nod of respect to the institution that really took a chance on this perhaps underqualified at the time, but bright upcoming coach. What do you recall about how Coach was remembered during that homecoming of sorts and the impact that had at the time?
Oh, I remember that game well. I remember Chris McAllister, he ran a kickoff for a touchdown.
Yeah, opening kickoff. That was my first 10 seconds of Arizona football that I'd ever watched. Kickoff taken to the end zone.
Yeah, the fans, of course, they were rooting for Hawaii, but they loved Coach Tomey. And it was like a hero's welcome back to the stadium. And I know that Hawaii coach, he didn't take any pleasure. I don't think he really was excited about this game because I know he really didn't want to play Hawaii. He took no pleasure in beating them, but it was a very emotional game for him. I think after the game, I mentioned this in the book, Coach Tomey went on the field congratulating the players, and he happened to see his former player, Gary Allen, who's like the star running back for Hawaii back in the day. And the two embraced, and Coach said he just had tears in his eyes, seeing him again. So I think that was the only time Coach came back as an opponent, but he really loved his time there.
Yeah.
And I know that one of his assistants was Bob Wagner, who used to be the head coach at Hawaii. And I think Coach Wags, because he got fired from UH, I think he took a little more pleasure in spanking Hawaii.
Yeah, I do recall that. Later on in my career, I ended up at UTEP for a time, and that was like a bowl game for us. We were a really bad football team, and went to the island and got whipped pretty handily. And I remember being outside the stadium. There was like a swap meet. There was just this energy. And Aloha Stadium today is in a bit of a no man's land. It's not the same place that it was when Coach Tomey was there and in later regimes. What would you say is the future for UH football in the years that have passed since then?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's kind of scary because Aloha Stadium has been condemned. It's no longer fit for any football games. Hawaii, the university, has resorted to using their home field, basically their practice field, to host their home games. It seats about maybe 15,000. And the future, they want to build a new stadium, but the way things work in Hawaii, who knows if it'll ever be built. So the program has hit some really hard times, but the new coach, Timmy Chang, he's sort of like Coach Tomey in a way that he really believes in the culture, and he's very hopeful that things will get turned around.
Yeah. Well, I know any book project like this, like Coach Tomey didn't sit down and pen the whole thing. These memoirs oftentimes are written primarily by the with author in the byline and with lessons and stories that are shared over the course of weeks or months. So you had a chance to work with him pretty extensively. What would you say you took away personally from your work on the project, and how did he make an impact on your life?
Well, I had always been a fan of Coach Tomey. In fact, my very first Hawaii football game happened to be Coach Tomey's first game as a Hawaii head coach. So I really had a lot of love and respect for him. And that was just, everything was just confirmed. Everything I knew about him was confirmed during our meetings and talks and interviews. One thing that really stood out for me is just how even just years after the fact, after his time in Hawaii, he was still very passionate about the UH program and his players. There were times when I would interview some past players and they would give me some pretty juicy stories. And I wanted to run with them. I thought, hey, this would be great for the book. But Coach Tomey would say, oh, that might not reflect well on this particular player. I don't think you should use it. And I really fought for, said, Coach, this would be great for the book. And I made a mistake of saying, Coach, I know you're protective of your players. And he just shot. He said, you're damn right I'm protective of my players. She still had that fire. He loved his players. And that really, really impressed me. And even the book signings that we did together, a whole bunch of his former players would show up at these events. And it was just amazing the love they still have for Coach.
Yeah. Well, I know it's been a few years since the book was published, and in that time we lost him. And I think for so many, you don't realize what you have until it's gone. And in the years that have passed since then, I've certainly been in touch with players who have talked about the impact and the life, the lessons, the legacy that he has left. And now to see one of his former assistants, certainly UH ties, Brad Brennan was recently on my show. His older brother Brent was a GA when I was there. And the Brennans with Colt obviously have connections to your age. So to see that staff come together with a lot of former, it's kind of like the band's gotten back together and now practicing on Coach Dick Tomey practice field. I'm really hopeful that things go well for Arizona and for Brent. And you just can't help but see Coach Tomey's fingerprints all over that staff and in the way that they're doing things. And it's exciting for me to see. I wish he could be here to see it, but in his absence, I feel like they're really, they're honoring his legacy. Well, Lance, I really appreciate your time. You've been fantastic. I appreciate your insights. And by all means, I may hit you up as we get a little deeper into this thing with some stories. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, sure. Anytime, Toby. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'm thankful to Lance for dropping in today, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. For more info on today's episode, be sure to check it out on the web. Simply go to undonepodcast.com/EP112 to see the notes, links, and images related to today's guest, Lance Tominaga. So now we know a bit about where Coach Tomey's story begins. But just how did a young coach from Indiana find himself leading the Rainbow Warriors? And what did those early years reveal about the kind of leader he would become? I hope you'll join me next time when I sit down with 4-time Super Bowl champion. 4 times. There's literally only 2 people in the history of humanity that have more Super Bowl rings than my next guest, Jesse Sapolu. He was there for all of it. He'll take us inside those early Tomey years, the highs, the challenges, and the moments that defined Dick Tomey's coaching career before the world really knew his name. From there, we'll sit down with Coach's son, Rich Tomey, as well as players and coaches who once shared the field and the sidelines with him, including today's Arizona head coach, Brent Brennan. So stick with me. We're just getting started. This and more coming up on Becoming UnDone, the life, lessons, and legacy of Dick Tomey, a Toby Brooks passion project. Becoming UnDone is a Night Tribe creative production written and produced by me, Toby Brooks. Do me a favor, tell a friend about the show, follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Becoming UnDone Pod, and follow me at Toby J. Brooks on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out my link tree at linktr.ee/Toby J. Brooks. Listen, subscribe, and leave me a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, football is easy. It's people that are hard. So until next time, keep getting better.